Hey, it's Jordan. Happy to be joined by Kshama Sawant, a former Seattle City Council member, and now with Workers Strike Back, which is all over America, organizing, particularly around labor and worker empowerment. Unfortunately, we're not talking about that today. For those of you who haven't seen, an American was killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank area last week. And there is quite a different response to this from the United States government than there has been when an American was killed by Hamas. Let me give you just some of the quick facts before we get your response. And this American was from Washington State and the Seattle area. So that's why we wanted Kshama Sawant's response. But this from Al Jazeera, U.S. on Monday, also appeared to reject calls for an independent investigation into the fatal shooting of Aysenur Ezgi. State Department spokesperson declined to acknowledge that Ezgi was killed by an Israeli soldier, shot in the head, by the way. But he called for the process to, quote, play out and for the facts to be gathered. He also urged Israel to, quote, quickly and robustly conduct its probe and make the findings public, but confirmed the administration is not planning to independently investigate the killing, as her family requested. There's a lot to get to, but first let's just get into who she was. 26 years old, just graduated from the University of Washington. She was actually volunteering with the International Solidarity Movement to protect Palestinians from violent Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And she had only been there volunteering for a short time when Israeli forces opened fire on Friday. Israel today, shockingly, their findings, of course, we heard similar lies when they shot a American reporter. But the IDF inquiry, if you want to call it that, they are finding that it is highly likely Turkish-American citizen Aysenur Ezgi was hit indirectly and unintentionally by IDF fire, which was not aimed at her. Eyewitnesses on the ground said it was intentional and it was aimed at her. Let me just ask you first, because I know there have been protests in Seattle. She was from this area, and you indirectly know people who know her family. How has this kind of shaken the community there?
As you might imagine, people are shocked and heartbroken and also angry because it's very clear that this, unfortunately, Aysenur Ezgi Eygi, or as she went by to everybody who knew her, Ezgi, was intentionally murdered by the Israeli military with a shot to the head. Last night, Workers Strike Back had a meeting in Seattle in memory of Ezgi and also to continue building the anti-war movement against the genocidal war by the Israeli state against the Palestinians. And one of our key speakers last night was Rizwan Samad, who is a Washington-based activist for Abandon Harris. As many of your viewers know, during the DNC protests, Abandon Biden has relaunched itself as Abandon Harris because they're very clear, as we all should be, that there is not an iota of difference between the genocidal policies of the Biden administration and what Harris has on offer as the Democratic nominee for president. And Rizwan was talking about how his family has known Aysenur or Ezgi, as we knew her, for a long time. His daughter was a close friend of Ezgi's, and his family knew her as almost like a family friend, as almost like a child of the family. So it has hit them really hard. They are in mourning, and his speech last night brought tears to the eyes of everyone who was in that hall, including me. And my own knowledge of Ezgi has been as a socialist, as an activist. She and I were in the same socialist organization for several years, as were many of my fellow members of Workers Strike Back. At the age of 18, Ezgi went as part of our socialist delegation to Standing Rock in solidarity with the movement that was protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline. And, those of us who went there, we went there in the freezing cold of December that year, and she was one of them. So that should give your viewers a sense of who she was. And my last conversation with her was actually at a worker strike back meeting a couple of months ago, when we talked about the strategy that was needed for the anti-war encampment protests at the University of Washington and at other campuses, about the need for the encampments to call for mass rallies of students on the campuses against the war, calling for an end to the genocide itself, an end to U.S. military funding, because those two are intricately connected. There can't be an end to the genocide without an end to U.S. military funding of the Israeli state. And also, we also talked about the need to break from both, at the time, Biden and Trump, and both the Democrats and Republicans, because both are warmongering parties, and at this moment, they're both purveyors of genocide. So this is an extremely tragic and gut-wrenching loss. Our deepest condolences go to Ezgi's family. It is a huge wrench for everybody who knew her and for our movement. And I would also say that, and as Ezgi herself would have said, the media attention her killing has received, as opposed to the 200,000 Palestinian deaths, is because she's an American citizen. And the best way we can honor her memory is by organizing to end the genocide, because what stands out is that even this brutal murder of an American citizen has not slowed the advance of the brutal, bloody policies of the Biden-Harris administration 1 inch.
Yes, and I should say we're recording this the morning of the presidential debate. My strong suspicion is her name will not be mentioned or asked about. Could be wrong, but that's my strong suspicion, that neither candidate will be asked about the American who was shot in the head by Israel, and who Israel is now saying it was an accident, just like they lied about the American reporter who it ended up that they killed a year or two ago. I want to, before we get to a truly deplorable State Department comment on this, I just want to frame this the right way. She was 26. She had just gone over there to help protect Palestinians who are under siege from the illegal settlements in the West Bank. And there were demonstrations against the expansion of these settlements. And in response, this was in the West Bank on Friday, just south of Nablus. And Israeli forces fired live ammunition, stun grenades, and tear gas in response to protests against their illegal expansion. So that's where she was. She wasn't doing anything wrong. These demonstrators, by all accounts, were not doing anything wrong. And they posed no threat to the Israeli army, just like the people who flooded a food aid truck months ago. They posed no threat and were shot at. Starving Palestinians were shot at. About 100 people were shot at, posed no threat. And we have gotten essentially the equivalent of thoughts and prayers, which is what we hear in response to mass shootings from politicians. That's what we're hearing from the State Department and the Biden administration, not actual force. But I just want to show you this because a reporter asked a State Department spokesperson, why the double standard? Because when Americans have been killed abroad elsewhere, the president, the State Department comes out forcefully. In this case, not so much. Let me show you this.
And the killing of a American citizen. Could you tell us a bit more after the statement was put out on Friday? Is there any more you can tell us about this incident and what you've been able to find out about it?
So I don't have any additional information for you, Simon. We, as we said on Friday, we are aware of the very tragic death of an American citizen, Aysenur Ezgi Eygi, in the West Bank, and we offer our deepest condolences to her family and her loved ones. We have urged a swift, thorough, and transparent investigation, and are urgently working to get more information as possible as it relates to the circumstances of her death. We have no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens, especially those that are abroad. Our understanding is that our partners in Israel are looking into the circumstances of what happened, and we expect them to make their findings public, and expect that whatever those findings are, expect them to be thorough and transparent. But I don't have any additional information around the circumstances beyond that, Simon.
You said you're urgently working to get more information. What does that involve? Who are you talking to?
So obviously having conversations with partners in the Israeli government, and as well as the deceased individual's family. But I don't have any, I didn't say that to mean that there is some sort of separate American investigation or anything like that. We are simply just trying to gather some more information and understand that there is a sort of formal process that we expect our partners in Israel to announce their findings of.
So you get the drift. The rest of it, he went on to dodge why you're relying on Israel to investigate its own actions. And he kept calling Israel our partners in the Middle East. I don't know about you, but what stands out to me is he basically says this isn't the same thing because those were terrorists that killed American citizens. But in this case, it seems that he's insinuating it was an accident.
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point, a good starting point for this is exactly what you quoted earlier, the Associated Press story where the report. I mean, this is from the AP. So this report actually quotes Jonathan Pollock, and there's actually a really important video interview that people who are watching this should watch from Jonathan Pollock, who is an Israeli activist who participated in the same protest where Ezgi was shot dead. And he's reporting that the shooting occurred after the dozens of people who were there, the activists, the Palestinians, they held a communal prayer on the hillside outside the northern West Bank town of Beta. And there, the soldiers, the Israeli military surrounded the prayer, and the clashes ensued because of that. And after that, the protesters and the activists retreated. And then after that, Jonathan Pollock watched as two soldiers, Israeli soldiers, went on the roof of a nearby home, trained a gun in the group's direction, and fired. And the next thing he knew, Ezgi was lying on the ground next to an olive tree, bleeding to death. And the doctors who examined her body confirmed that she was shot in the head. So, obviously, there should be an investigation. I support the family's request and demand really in the investigation, but let's also not have illusions. The Israeli state and the US imperialist interests who are aiding and abetting the Israeli state in carrying out this genocidal war are not going to investigate themselves. And I think we should also understand that the State Department official who said, well, we in other cases, it's terrorist actions intentionally putting citizens in harm's way. This was state terrorism that intentionally put an American citizen in harm's way. Let's be very clear. That's what it was. This is state terrorism that intentionally put an American citizen in harm's way. And this whole genocidal war being carried out by the Israeli state against the Palestinian people, now not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. It has to be clear. And, Ezgi was shot dead in the West Bank. This is state terrorism on a truly horrific scale. In fact, if you look at the pace of the war, the genocide that's being conducted, we obviously need statistics, but it is advanced more rapidly than perhaps any genocide of this scale in human history, because let's look at the proportions. In less than 1 year, an estimated 10% of the Palestinian population has been killed. Entire bloodlines have been wiped out. And alongside all this bloody carnage is the shocking destruction of infrastructure, like willful. You saw these bulldozers and giant excavators destroying roads as a campaign of destruction. 70% of the roads have been destroyed actually already in the West Bank. And so from roads to residential buildings, from hospitals to universities, all of this is being destroyed. And aside from the actual killing by the military, just the destruction of the infrastructure has claimed tens of thousands of lives because of lack of water, food, sanitation, and mobility. So all of this is in the play, and I don't think we can make any mince any words about the objectives of Netanyahu and the Israeli ruling class. They're making it very clear. This is about flattening Gaza and the West Bank on such a scale that it makes it unlivable for the Palestinians who survived the genocide. Some have even speculated that it is an attempt by the Israeli ruling class at a final solution of their genocidal ethnic cleansing project. And certainly the Israeli ruling class have done or said nothing to prove otherwise. But the crux of all of this here, and this goes to the State Department's statement and why there's a double standard. The reporter was asking him, why is there a double standard, or is there a double standard? Obviously, there absolutely is a double standard. But the only way to understand that is to understand that the interests of U.S. capitalism and imperialism are bound up with the Israeli state. In fact, the creation of the Israeli state itself decades ago was a product of Western imperialism as a whole, both British and U.S. imperialism and imperialist interests, Western imperialist interests, which are again linked with the interests of Western capitalism. That is the genesis of this whole crisis and conflict and carnage that is happening in that region. And that also explains why there is no end right now, unless we build the anti-war movement to a monumental scale to stop them. There's no end to the supply of arms from the U.S. state to the Israeli state, and both the Democrats and Republicans are in collusion in this, and there's not going to be any change if Harris becomes president, as the Democratic nominee of the in this presidential election. That's what's going on. At the end of the day, it is the interests of U.S. capitalism and imperialism that are being upheld, and in order to do that, they have, for decades, they've had to conduct this sort of divide and conquer policy and also foster many, many extreme right-wing ideologies. I mean, this is all part and parcel of capitalism and imperialism, and that is the only way to understand why this is happening and why, when an American citizen gets killed by the Israeli state, that is given cover and is not characterized as terrorism, even though it absolutely is state terrorism on a horrific scale.
And this just came across, so I wanted to make sure I got your response to it. Secretary of State Antony Blinken commented on this a little bit more forcefully, but again, pretty empty rhetoric, if you ask me. I wanted to play this because he did, in some ways, criticize Israel, but again, get your response to what seems like fairly empty rhetoric.
Thank you very much. With regard to the tragic killing of Aysenur, I think what we saw of this investigation is it seems to show what eyewitnesses have said and made clear, that her killing was both unprovoked and unjustified. No one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. No one should have to put their life at risk just for freely expressing their views. In our judgment, Israeli security forces need to make some fundamental changes in the way that they operate in the West Bank, including changes to their rules of engagement. We've long seen reports of the security forces looking the other way when extremist settlers use violence against Palestinians.
More than I expected him to say, but again, in America, if you were to find out that police were unprovoked and unjustified in shooting an American citizen in the head, typically there would be criminal charges. Well, not typically, but sometimes there would be criminal charges against a police officer. But here, he's saying, the Secretary of State is saying this was unprovoked and unjustified, but the response is they need to make some fundamental changes to their process.
I think the fact that Antony Blinken made that statement shows that they are under pressure especially because of the presidential election year, and because it's also the timing of this, the euphoria that greeted Harris's nomination in newly, and it was not even a nomination process because there was no democracy. That was really anointing, a coronation process. There was this incredible euphoria around that for a while, and that is starting to wear off because people are now starting to think more seriously about, okay, what does Harris actually stand for? And on top of that, there is a real danger for them. I mean, from the standpoint of the Democratic elite and from the standpoint of the Harris campaign, that she is facing a real challenge in the swing states, and the war and the genocide is a big issue, and it is the paramount issue for the Muslim American community, and within the Muslim, the Arab American community, and within the Arab American, the Palestinian community. So, this is for the Muslim community as a whole. The question of U.S. support for Israel is the most paramount question, and and to highlight how empty Blinken's words are, as you said correctly, Jordan. It's not like he said this is tragic, this shouldn't have happened, and it clearly shows that we cannot give a blank check to the Israeli state, so we are going to stop shipments of arms. He's not saying that. Only weeks ago, the Biden-Harris administration, and keep in mind this is the Biden-Harris administration, approved over $20 billion of arms shipments that are going to happen over many years. So in other words, they are making an investment for the future. So for over years, this is the entrenched years long, and at this point, decades long policy of US capitalism and imperialism. And there is no stopping them unless if first we build a strong enough anti-war movement to end this genocidal war, and then after that, the ending of all ending of the brutal occupation, and then larger solutions need to be in place. So I want to be very clear. I don't think there's any solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict on the basis of capitalism. You're not going to have one Palestine capitalist state and one Israeli capitalist state, and then that the US imperialism is going to allow them to live in harmony. That is, such a thing is a complete impossibility. The only solution for this crisis is for a voluntary socialist Palestine and socialist Israel within a voluntary socialist confederation in the Middle East. And I'm not claiming that it's going to happen today. My point is that is the only vision we can have in order to actually end this brutal occupation, which has gone on for decades and taken too many lives. So if you talk about Blinken's empty words, that's the point to make, that there has not been an iota of shift in their actual policy towards Israel, and specifically in the arms shipments to Israel. But the fact that he's saying that shows that they are under pressure, and the pressure is real. I mean, if you look at the poll results from the Council of American Islamic Relations that just released its fuller results yesterday, actually, and we talked about this at the Workers' Strike Back meeting last night. The Council on American Islamic Relations did a presidential election survey of American Muslim voters last month in August, and their poll is showing that among Muslims, Jill Stein is polling ahead of Harris in 3 crucial swing states. Stein is polling at 35% in Arizona, at 40% in Michigan, and at 44% in Wisconsin. And this is among Muslim Americans. I want to be clear, it's not the whole state. It's not a poll of all voters. However, it is a very significant thing because this could mean the tipping point for Harris losing in these swing states. And obviously the pivotal state here, for obvious reasons, given the population of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, is Michigan. And I want to echo what Hassan Abdul Salam, the founder of Abandon Harris, has said, that one of the concrete goals of the anti-war movement, and obviously he posed it as a goal for Abandon Harris, but I'm saying that this needs to be the goal for the anti-war movement as a whole. A goal is to defeat Harris in Michigan, because it would be one of the clearest possible messages to the warmongering Democratic Party that you are going to pay, an actual real price for having genocidal policies and for not moving an inch, even though the majority of Americans not only oppose the war, but they also oppose US military funding. And I have to say, this, you cannot talk about how the Democrats have betrayed Muslim Americans and working class Americans as a whole without talking about the role of the labor leadership. These labor unions, including UAW, the National Education Association, big unions who not only passed ceasefire resolutions, but also publicly sent a letter to Biden demanding that there's an immediate end to all US military funding to Israel. These are all demands we strongly support. However, these same union leaders then turned around and they not only endorsed Harris, it's not like they endorsed Harris begrudgingly, they are cheerleading her. Sean Fain, the president of the UAW International, went to the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, and was praising Harris. And this betrayal needs to be talked about as well, because as long as the labor leadership is tied at the hip to the Democratic Party, they are going to be the central obstacle to labor organizing against a genocidal war. I mean, we need massive strike actions against a genocidal war. Workers' Strike Back has called for a one-day coordinated strike action nationwide to shut down the U.S. profit machine. That is the kind of step we need to build an anti-war movement that is actually capable of ending this genocide. But that is not going to happen with this current labor leadership, because they are completely betraying the anti-war movement and working people. And so the only way this can be done is if there is a rank and file uprising inside the labor movement against the support by the labor leadership of the genocidal candidates. I mean, rank and file people weren't asked. I mean, we had a member of AFSCME, the public sector union nationally, which is one of the three biggest unions in the nation, speak at our event last night, and she talked about how, as a rank and file member of AFSCME, she was never asked whom to endorse, Harris or Trump or Jill Stein. The union just endorsed Harris without checking, without any democratic process within the union. And so we need to challenge this as well. And so as part of the anti-war movement and building the vote for Jill Stein, we also need rank and file labor union members putting forward recent Harris endorsement resolutions in their unions. I don't expect that these resolutions will win, because they will come against a huge obstacle with the labor leadership, but it will provoke a debate that is much needed in order to actually have that kind of militant organizing by rank and file, without which we are not going to be able to build the kind of anti-war movement we need, because it needs those strike actions.
Obviously, my expertise is more domestic affairs. I don't pretend to be a foreign policy expert, but I know enough to know that you just look at the last half century, perhaps more than that, it just seems like it's deja vu in terms of American foreign policy. In Vietnam, we were trying to, fight the communists and shut down communism. And that's why we went there to stop the spread of communism, which you can't fight an idea, you can't eradicate an idea or an ideology. Then in Iraq and Afghanistan to fight the Taliban and fight Al Qaeda, but we were there for 20 years, and so many reports have come out saying, even the generals were saying very quickly, there's no plan here, there's no point, there's no strategy, and now we're supporting this to quote eradicate Hamas, which again, similar to Vietnam, that's not even a thing. You cannot eradicate an idea that much of that idea is based on oppression and what Israel has done to Palestinians. It just seems like have this blank check and there's no bottom to it, even if Americans are killed by Israel. But there's no actual goal here. There's no endpoint. Supposedly it's to eradicate Hamas, but that's not possible, obviously. What are your thoughts on the pattern I just described?
Absolutely, the pattern is very much in existence, and it is what you just said. I mean, drawing that pattern, that historical continuity of war and destruction, is very much linked with what I was just saying about the this kind of war and bloodshed being linked with capitalism and imperialism itself. And in fact, that goes to part of the heart of why I am a socialist, because I don't believe that this kind of horror can be ended on the basis of capitalism. So like you said, it's one day it's against Vietnam, and let's not forget Iraq and Afghanistan. Then it's obviously we also have what's the destruction that's happening with Russian and Ukrainian soldiers being killed and the destruction of Ukraine. And then you have the genocidal war against the Palestinians. All of this, the explanation for all of this is linked with the understanding of the way capitalism and warmongering are intricately connected. A warmongering and bloodshed of innocent people, millions of innocent people, is on the DNA of capitalism itself. So as long as we accept capitalism as the system in the world, we will keep, generations will experience this deja vu feeling. Generations after us will be saying, I'm getting a deja vu feeling. And in fact, it will be much worse than it is now, because it won't only be this war, sort of geopolitical war on the basis of oil resources. It will also be wars that are being engendered because of climate crisis and the catastrophe that billions of people are facing. And already we are seeing the beginnings of that type of conflict where millions upon millions of people are being displaced because of uninhabitable conditions created by the climate catastrophe, which is itself created by capitalism. And then because of those mass scales of displacements, resulting in conflict among ordinary, one set of ordinary people pitted against another set of ordinary people, sort of a grand scale of divide and conquer of working people as a whole. And so this is going to continue and keep continuing for generations, and it'll be more and more barbaric unless we fight for a different kind of society. And I think that society is a socialist society, which means that a society that is not based on that capitalism is, where there's a deep class divide, and everything that happens, the policies that are pursued by the political representatives of that system are geared towards maximizing profits and wealth for a sliver of society at the top, and then the rest are paying the price in different ways. Either it is the worst kind of price that the Palestinian people are facing, or working people as a whole, including in the richest country in the world, in the United States, where our standards of living are going rock bottom while you have more billionaires than before. And so all of this then poses the question of what should we do right now? I mean, I honestly, as I said, I don't believe that this can be addressed on the basis of capitalism, but we also cannot absolve ourselves by making that statement and saying, okay, the left has provided leadership. Actually, it presents a concrete question right now. What are the concrete steps we need to take right now in order to continue organizing against the genocidal war? And I think there are lots of lessons from the Vietnam War, as you mentioned, and also from the Iraq War. I mean, these wars were not ended because this or that Democrat got elected. In fact, the Vietnam War was ended during the administration of Richard Nixon, who was a deep reactionary and a Republican president. But it happened, that war ended because millions upon millions of Americans protested, including active duty soldiers, protested against the war courageously. And that's the kind of movement we will need to build now, anti-war movement. But I don't think that it is possible at this moment. We are in the presidential election year from now until November 5th. We cannot say that we are opposed to the genocide and then turn around and vote for one of the genocidal candidates, which is Harris and Trump. So at this moment, organizing against a genocide has to mean, and it does mean, and there is no way of getting away from it, it means taking a stand against the genocide in the presidential election, which means rejecting both the warmongering candidates, but it also doesn't mean just standing on the sidelines and feeling demoralized, because that doesn't help the anti-war movement. What we need to do is to build the best possible vote, the strongest possible vote for the strongest left anti-war pro-worker candidate, who in our view is Jill Stein.
And I also want to point out, we were talking about double standards. We should also point out the response when the American Hirsch, let me make sure I have the name correct, Hirsch Goldberg Poland was one of the 6 hostages recently killed by Hamas. Tragic. I don't think anybody is for that. And rightly, people, America responded strongly because he was an American and killed by Hamas. And the media has covered him. His parents have been interviewed often. So that response, which I think there should be that level of response, but when it's the other side and it's an American killed, but a pro-Palestinian American, who went there to help defend Palestinians, there's some news articles, but it's not the same outcry. So it seems that if it's Hamas that does it, global outrage or American media outrage, but in this, it's definitely muted.
There is no question that it is very muted, and also, as you said, there is no question any innocent lives that have been lost in this conflict is grotesque, and so it's not a question of criticizing the mourning of Israeli and U.S. Israeli people who have been killed, U.S. or Israeli people who have been killed by Hamas terrorism, but it's a question of understanding the source of the conflict and also having a sense of proportion. In other words, when when I was on the city council until last year, I was on the Seattle City Council for a decade as a socialist, and as you know, we won the $15 an hour minimum wage, the Amazon tax, and unprecedented renters' rights. One of the last things my office did before leaving office was last November pass the strongest, at that time, the strongest ceasefire resolution, in solidarity with the people of Gaza. And in that resolution, we condemned the terrorism by Hamas. And at the same time, we also said that the state terrorism of the Israeli state, the Israeli military, is on a far, far bigger scale. And moreover, the root of this crisis is the Western imperialist supported project of the Israeli state. There's no getting away from these facts. And there's another fact that is never mentioned in corporate media, which is that forces like Hamas themselves have been fostered by the Israeli state because it offers them the perennial excuse to go and kill and destroy the Palestinian people. I mean, in reality, as a socialist, I can tell you that the leadership of Hamas is reactionary. They are anti-worker and anti-union. And that is not a force or ideology to be supported. But I don't believe that the vast majority of Palestinians left to themselves, working people, would support anti-worker or reactionary policies either. The point here is that they are being killed relentlessly by the Israeli state. And the only way to end this carnage is, first of all, most immediately, building an anti-war movement that is able to that is able to put enough pressure on the U.S. Government itself. And, come January, it is going to be either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Either way, you are going to have a genocidal warmonger in chief. And that is why organizing against a genocide has to mean rejecting both Harris and Trump, rejecting both Democrats and Republicans. And at this moment, that means you can't reject in the abstract. Rejecting means building the campaign of the strongest left anti-war pro-worker campaign, and that's Jill Stein. It has to concretely mean that, because otherwise you are betraying any leadership on the left that is not clearly saying this and taking a position on this is whether unwittingly or intentionally ending up selling out a little bit here and there. Even if they are opposing Harris and Trump, if they're not saying that this is concretely what we need to do, which is to build the Jill Stein campaign and build the anti-war vote, and also take on concrete objectives like, as Abandon Harris is saying, defeating Harris in Michigan, that leadership is falling short, let alone the labor leadership that is openly embracing Harris and at the same time saying, oh, we want ceasefire. No, that is complete doublespeak, and we need to call it out as doublespeak.
And my last question on her tragic killing, just to kind of humanize it. You had mentioned that you knew her when she was 18. And you also told me that you recently spoke with her. You recently saw her and you discussed, organizing strategies before she went over there. Could you kind of just share a little bit more about her? Just, I know you weren't, necessarily close, but you had interaction. So we could tell people what she was like, her passion, and the discussions you recently had.
Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to be her closest friend, but we meaning myself and my fellow socialists here in Seattle, we knew her quite well because, as I said, we were all in the same socialist organization for several years. And in fact, she joined when she was very young in 2016, as I said, when she was 18, and she was 26, as you said, when she was killed last week. And at such an early age, she had such a clear and well-developed understanding of the need to reject capitalism and imperialism, and she identified as a socialist. All of this is just remarkable in someone at that age, and it also shows how there is huge potential to organize among young people, because there are people like Ezgi out there, and it is crucial that we organize the left such that that we are harnessing this potential. And she, in addition to going to Standing Rock to stand with the Dakota Access Pipeline protesters, she also led a student walkout against Trump. After Trump was elected, there was a series of protests and walkouts, and some of those were student protests and walkouts that were led by socialists who were students in their schools, and she led a student walkout herself. And then and when I talked to her a couple of months ago at that worker strike back meeting, she had actually been in Turkey for many years. That's her she was a dual Turkish and American citizen. She was born in Turkey. So I hadn't seen her for several years, and neither had the other socialists I work with in Worker Strike Back. But we were all delighted to see her back there. And it is clear that she had only grown in her political understanding of the world. The sophistication of her analysis had clearly developed, and it was just an absolute delight and honor to be talking to her. And one of the main things she was concerned about is actually the strategy that was being used by the encampment, the leaders of the campus encampments. And she was very concerned that they should actually turn outward and that they should build rallies and protests of students, thousands of students. I mean, she was at the University of Washington. I mean, keep in mind, this is a big university with tens of thousands of students. It is possible to build protest rallies of thousands of students. And I hope that the students at the University of Washington and other universities who are watching this will take inspiration from Aysenur Ezgi Eygi and build mass protests of students on campuses in this fall quarter or fall semester, and call for an end to the war, the genocide, an end to U.S. military funding, and also call for a breaking from Harris and Trump in order to send a strong message from the anti-war movement that genocide is a red line. We will not cross that red line. So anybody who's watching this, if you want to pay homage to Ezgi's memory, that is the thing that we need to do. The only way to honor Ezgi's memory is to say collectively, we are drawing a red line against genocide, and we will never, never support any genocidal political candidates.